Malika Akbar, Vinita Chetripal, and Nilofer Kaul, and with Sudhir Kakkar as its president, the Delhi chapter was set up in December 2013. Dr. Madhusudin, trained in the United States of America in New York, also settled in Delhi. The chapter has hosted eminent psychoanalysts and has had peer and group supervision regularly. Today, our Delhi chapter is a motley group of analysts and aspiring analysts, often with different orientations, who are held together by their love for psychoanalysis. At present, the Indian Psychoanalytical Society has 45 full members and 42 trainee candidates. During the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown, the Delhi group was forced to suspend its activities. The Mumbai group offered counseling to COVID patients on specified days. The Kolkata group continued its activities online and organized a free tele-helpline to people needing help. It was run on a national level for 4 months from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. We hope that in the near future also, the Indian Psychoanalytical Society will be able to continue with its mission of helping persons with mental health problems and make meaningful contribution in the area of psychoanalysis continuously.
We welcome you all.
Thank you.
Well, again, welcoming you all. May I invite our President-elect, Dr. Harriet Wolf, to say something. Dr. Wolf, are you there? Yeah, I can.
I forgot to unmute. Yeah. I'm sorry.
All right.
Let me just see this here. Yeah. So I'm honored to join you on this important occasion. It's wonderful to realize it was exactly 99 years ago that the Indian Psychoanalytical Society was founded. The fact that your rich history will be celebrated over the course of the coming year, your 100th year, is inspiring. Some aspects of your history stand out for me particularly. First, the tradition of deep insight and deep-going thought begun by Dr. Bose in his doctoral thesis on repression. Second, your commitment to public service, also begun by Dr. Bose, who began a free clinic of his own as he saw patients in the outdoor chamber of his home. The Memorial Clinic, founded in his name in 1970, continues to serve the poor for nominal fees, making mental health care a priority through a psychoanalytic commitment. Finally, your library and your scholarly tradition stand out. From the Bengali Dictionary of Psychoanalytic Terms, first published by Dr. Bose in 1953, to your current library and journal. I was inspired by Dr. Pushpa Mishra's talk, recorded in Taiwan in 2017 at the Asia Pacific Conference, where she not only enumerated the many ways in which the Indian Psychoanalytical Society could and would like to contribute to the development of the Asia Pacific region. She also expressed a determination that will help the future of psychoanalysis worldwide. I quote, "Where there is a will, there is a way." So we look forward to working with you in all these areas with persistence and effectiveness, psychoanalytic training, community service and outreach, and scientific development. Congratulations on your long and impressive history, and all best wishes for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harriet. It's so nice to hear from you. Well, may I invite our Vice President, Sergio Nick. Please, Sergio, will you say something? Yeah.
To me, it's good morning. For you, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. When I accepted Pushpa's invitation to take part in this memorable event to celebrate the centenary of the Indian Psychoanalytical Society, one of the oldest components of the IPA, I felt great pleasure for that. The IPS has been marked by the recognition of the exceptional work and seriousness of its founder with psychoanalytic theory and practice, Dr. Bose. He approached psychoanalysis in an original and creative way, revealing the plasticity and effectiveness of our practice. I believe it is exactly these skills that are fundamental for us. And that is what makes psychoanalysis continue to survive for over 100 years. During my term as vice president of the IPA, I could follow more closely the work of several IPA component societies around the world. And certainly the exchange and contact with Indian colleagues was very rich. Especially in recent years, it has been a great pleasure to work closely with Pushpa Mishra and Mini Dastur, to say a few, on the Asia Pacific Planning Committee, and to be able to share ideas, experiences, and visions in order to foster psychoanalysis and the growth of the Asia Pacific region in IPA. I would like also to take the opportunity to celebrate and say that I look forward to the next Asia Pacific conference that will take place in India in 2022. I have, with pleasure, taken part in the organization. By that time, I will no longer be the IPA vice president, but I really hope that we can meet in person to celebrate this very significant and symbolic occasion. And finally, I would like to congratulate you all for your competence, professionalism, and dedication in the hard work of transmitting psychoanalysis, and express my warmest wishes for the continuation of this very important mission. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you very much. May I call upon Ms. Adriana Prengler, our Vice President-elect now?
Yes, thank you. 1 second, I'm looking for something. 1 second. Well, thank you first very much for the invitation to attend the inauguration of the centennial celebration of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, marking its creation on January 26, 1922. As past president-elect of the International Psychoanalytic Association, I am delighted and honored to be here celebrating one of the earliest psychoanalytic institutions established in the world. It is also a great pleasure for me to meet the distinguished Dr. Sudhir Kakar and all of you. I learned that the founder of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society, Dr. Girindrasekhar Bose, independently discovered the concept, as you said, of repression, and also the idea that for every conscious wish, there is its opposite operating in the unconscious. Through the exchange of letters between Freud and Bose, Freud expressed his pleasure at the formation of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. It was very interesting for me to learn that 90 years ago, in 1931, on Freud's 75th birthday, the Indian Psychoanalytic Society sent Freud the gift of a white Vishnu made of ivory, which he situated in a place of honor on his desk, where it sat for the rest of his life. Vishnu represents preservation and protection, and in this case, we might imagine that it reassured Freud that India would preserve and protect psychoanalysis. It was for Freud a reminder of the progress of psychoanalysis and the way it was reaching foreign countries far from Austria. Freud and Bose came from very different backgrounds. Freud from Austria was influenced by his Jewish European background, and Bose from India was influenced by his immersion in Indian philosophy. And yet, when they each studied the human mind, both discovered similar psychological concepts. This is a beautiful illustration of the importance of the International Psychoanalytic Association, which draws together psychoanalysts from different parts of the world, permitting us to share similarities and be enriched by our diversity. It will be a great pleasure and enriching experience for all of us to join in, I hope, commemorating to the 100th anniversary of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society in the Asian Pacific Conference coming up in 2022. Thank you so much for your contribution to psychoanalysis.
Thank you, Adriana. And I really hope and wish that all of you can come to our Asia Pacific meet and we all meet in person, not virtually. So thank you very much. So may I invite now our secretary from Delhi, Ms. Malika Akbar, to introduce our societies to you and introduce Dr. Kakkar, who actually doesn't need any introduction. Malika.
Okay. Good day, everyone. As Bharti has just told you, Dr. Kakkar needs no introduction for most of us here in India. But for friends of the IPS joining us from abroad, a few words about his work may not be amiss. Dr. Kakkar broke the very private bastions within which psychoanalysis had enclosed itself in India by writing and speaking in public forums of facets of the human mind and their expression in our political, cultural, and social entities. He has introduced the idea of an Indian school of psychoanalysis as distinguished from the classical Freudian one. This proposes the existence of a cultural unconscious, positioned somewhere between the individual and the universal unconscious. His books and novels are an eclectic mix in which he has drawn from Hindu mythology, from historical and political events, from sexuality, from social and religious violence, from mystics and political personalities. The thread linking them all is an unrelenting search for emotional and psychological truth, however irreverent and unacceptable it might be. We are happy and proud to have him here with us today. Before I request Dr. Kakkar to present his paper, a word about the Mumbai and Delhi chapters of the IPS. While Kolkata continues to be the headquarters of the IPS, still housed in the home in which Dr. Girindrasekhar Bose lived, Mumbai and Delhi have the autonomy to work separately and together, to train and supervise candidates, to follow their own ideological paths within the analytic framework. There is easy and open communication among the three wings, and this has contributed considerably to the growth of interest in psychoanalysis in India. Members from Kolkata, Delhi, and Mumbai will present soon after Dr. Kakkar.
So, Dr. Kakkar, now you are to start. Please. You need to unmute yourself, probably.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
Yes, yes.
Honorable guests, the presidents of the International and the Indian Psychoanalytic Societies, and colleagues, many of whom I know personally, but some who I don't, my greetings. I'm honored to preside over this meeting that marks the 100th birth centenary of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society. Our secretary, Bharati Jain, who has worked so hard in organizing this meeting, has asked me to say a few words, and I quote her, about how you see psychoanalysis in an Indian context. There is bound to be much that may be familiar to some of you in this talk from my earlier writings, and here I ask for your indulgence. Our ideas are not unlimited, and the few we are blessed with are like shattered pieces of glass in a kaleidoscope that appear and reappear in our writings. Is it? With more and more Asian societies becoming members or aspiring to the membership of the International Psychoanalytic Association, remarks may also have some relevance for other non-Western colleagues. Our society's kind invitation sent my thoughts back to its founder president, Girindrasekhar Bose. There is no way to deny that this original mind was the first analyst to raise the issue of the cultural relativity of a key psychoanalytic concept when he wrote to Freud, quote, Indian patients do not exhibit castration symptoms to such a marked degree as my European cases, or, quote, the desire to be female is more easily unearthed in Indian male patients than in European, or, quote again, the Oedipus mother is very often a combined parental image. Freud was politely dismissive of this challenge from Calcutta to the psychoanalytic claim of universality of its theories and models, and the discussion did not go much further. Privately, he showed some irritation with Bose and first generation of Indian analysts. For instance, he is reported to have remarked to his patient, the poet Hilda Doolittle, and I quote, on the whole, I think my Indian students have reacted in the least satisfactory way to my teaching. And later, in context of the Japanese Association, the only other non-Western society in the IPA at the time, Doolittle writes, he, that is Freud, and I agreed that the Jap may be something where the Hindu was all muddles with unconscious and with psychoanalysis in general. And when the writer Mulk Raj Anand, who went to see Freud for a few sessions in Vienna as a young man, Freud is reported to have burst out mid-session, quote, you Indians with your eternal mother complex. When it comes to India then, Freud was respectful but baffled. We have a taste of this bafflement in his response to the French novelist Romain Rolland. Freud admired Rolland, and when Rolland sent Freud a copy of his biography of the Bengali mystic Sri Ramakrishna, Freud responded, and I quote, I shall now try with your guidance to penetrate into the Indian jungle from which now an uncertain blending of Hellenic love of proportion, Jewish sobriety, and Philistine timidity have kept me away. So together, let us just explore one trail through the Indian jungle that causes Freud unease. Perhaps it is the way of looking at the world in the Indian geography, its vision of reality that diverges sharply from the post-Enlightenment West in which psychoanalysis has its roots. From the neurosciences, we are learning more and more of the culture's preeminent role in shaping the software of the infant's brain. For instance, our cultural environment in its everyday structures, practices, and aesthetics shapes even the way our brain processes visual information. And if this is true for neurobiological, non-conscious visual processing, it seems almost certain it will be true for psychoanalytically relevant unconscious processes. Disseminated through myths and legends, proverbs and metaphors, enacted in religious rituals, conveyed through tales told to children, given a modern veneer in films, glimpsed in admonitions of parents, as also in the future vistas they hold out to their children, a culture's vision of reality is observed from early on in life, not via the logic of the head, but via the emotional stirrings of the heart and body in which this reality is encoded. These are not philosophical doctrines that are relevant only for religious and intellectual elites, but beliefs and attitudes, many of them not conscious, that are reflected in the lives, songs, and stories of a vast number of people who share a common culture. It is the vision of reality that interprets central human experiences and answers perennial questions on what is good and what is evil, what is real and what is unreal, what is the essential nature of men and women and the world they live in, and what is a person's connection to nature, to other human beings, and to the cosmos. The civilization's vision of reality organizes knowledge. It shapes the neuronal processes of attention, perception, reasoning, and inference making. It is perhaps the Indian culturally specific way of interpreting the world that caused Freud ease. For in the psychoanalytic vision, human satisfactions and goals are fundamentally personal and individual. Each of us lives in his or her own subjective world, pursuing personal pleasures and private fantasies, constructing a lifeline, which, when our time is over, will vanish. Achievements and failures are individual. Emotional distress and pain live in a center of awareness we call the individual mind. Distress amelioration, too, is only possible through operations performed by the individual mind. In this model, the essential function of society is to preserve the possibility of that personal fulfillment. Society cannot provide anything positive. It cannot add anything to individual fulfillment. What it can do is to prevent something negative, the interference with individual satisfactions. The other storyline common to many Asian civilizations, including ours, is a counter view, which exalts the community, especially the family vis-a-vis the individual. This view stresses that belonging to community is a fundamental need of a person and asserts that only if a person truly belongs to such a community, naturally and unself-consciously, can they enter the living stream and lead a full, creative, spontaneous life. Both visions of human experience also have their downside. If the dark side of autonomous individuality is the incorrigible pursuit of self-interest in the grip of unbridled greed, then that of community is its exclusivity, its intolerance for non-conformity, and thus its potential for violence. Of course, these prototypical patterns do not exist in their pure form in any society. Accounts of psychotherapy with middle-class Western patients tells us that autonomy of the self is as precarious in reality as is the notion of an Indian self that is merged in the surroundings of its family and community. In a sense, both the autonomy and the intertwined nature of the self are fictions. Their influence on behavior derives not from their actual occurrence, but from their enshrinement as cultural ideas. Of course, for an individual Indian, this civilizational heritage, the culture's vision of reality, is modified or overlaid by the specific cultures of their family, caste, class, or ethnic group through which it is transmitted. The modern Indian, who forms the bulk of the clientele for psychoanalytic therapy, is attracted to the analytic vision in part because they view psychoanalysis as an ally for the realization of their autonomous individuality. But the interest of the modern Indian in individual autonomy does not mean that the Indian civilizational vision has disappeared from their psyche. Just as we talk about an intergenerational transmission of trauma, we need to be aware of a preconscious or unconscious intergenerational transmission of culture. The future of the modern Indian too will have at heart. How does this apply to the Indian analyst? As Indian analysts, however consciously committed we are to the psychoanalytic vision, as much as to our patients, we need to be aware of the mix of the psychoanalytic universal and the Indian cultural and subcultural visions of reality in our own psyche. When attending to a conflict between the two visions in the life of a modern Indian woman or man, the knowledge of our own proclivities in this mix allows us to be more helpful to our patients. In the almost 100 years since the exchange between Freud and Bose, we have learned a good deal on the role of culture in the constitution of the human psyche. The inner world, the space occupied by the so-called self, is not only constituted of the psychic representations of a person's bodily life and of the primary relationships within the family, but also includes representations of their society's culture and social institutions. The self is thus a system of reverberating representational worlds, representations of culture, primary family relationships, and a bodily life, each enriching, constraining, and shaping the others as they jointly evolve through the life cycle. A revision of the psychoanalytic concepts of self, identity, and subjectivity would also show that none of these constituting inner worlds, the representations of body, family, and culture, are primary or deeper. There is thus no need for a hierarchical ordering of aspects of the psyche or to attempt an archaeological layering of the different inner worlds, although at different times, the self may well be primarily experienced in one or the other representational mode. Human beings do share universals, but they are perhaps much less than what we, and especially many analysts, believe. We need to recognize that many psychoanalytic propositions on what constitutes psychological maturity, gender-appropriate behaviors, positive or negative resolutions of developmental conflicts and complexes that often appear in the garb of universal truths are actually the incorporation of Western middle-class experience and values into psychoanalytic theory. Fundamental ideas about human relationships, family, marriage, male and female, and so on, which are essentially cultural in origin, often remain unexamined and are regarded as universally valid. Let me just give a couple of examples that are fundamental for our psychic makeup and the way we view the world: gender and family. Unconsciously absorbed since childhood, it is our culture that it determines what it means to be, look, think, or behave like a man or a woman. This becomes clearer if one thinks of Greek or Roman sculpture with their hard, muscled men's bodies and chests without any fat at all, familiar to most Europeans from childhood visits to museums or reproduced in countless visual mediums, and compare it with the sculpted representation of Hindu gods in the temples or the Buddha, where the bodies are softer, suppler, and in their hint of breasts nearer to the female form. Between a minimum of sexual differentiation needed to function heterosexually with a modicum of pleasure, and a maximum which cuts off any sense of empathy and emotional contact with the other sex that is experienced as a different species altogether, there's a whole range of positions, each occupied by a culture that assumes it is universal and insists on calling it the only one that is mature and healthy. And the family? From my own training analysis in Germany, I remember my feelings of estrangement on how my analysts and I attached varying importance to different family relationships. For instance, in my Indian childhood, I had spent long periods of my young life in the extended families of my parents. Various uncles, aunts, and cousins had constituted a vital part of my growing up experience. To pay them desultory attention or to reduce them to parental figure in the analytic interpretations felt like a serious impoverishment of my inner world. This almost exclusive emphasis on the parental couple in psychoanalysis, I realize, has also to do with the modern Western conception of the family, which has the husband-wife couple as its fulcrum. In the traditional Indian view, which still exerts a powerful influence on how even most modern Indians view marriage and family, parent-sons and filial bonds among the sons living in an extended family override the importance of the couple as the foundation of the family. The couple is important, but secondary to the idea of the family. Cultural ideals demand that the universal dream of sexual love that constitutes and seeks to find its culmination in the couple be muted. They enjoin members of the extended family to remain vigilant, lest the couple becomes a fortress that shuts out all other relationships within the family. This, of course, is changing, but it is still a very powerful story in the Indian cultural view. In the Indian Hindu culture, then, separation from the family is not looked upon in the same way as in North European and North American cultures. A thoughtful Indian may agree with Freud's opening sentence in 1919 Family Romances, and I quote, "The separation of the individual as he grows up from the authority of the parents is one of the most necessary achievements of his development, yet at the same time, one of the most painful, as long as the words is one of the most necessary achievements were omitted." The Indian cultural position is exemplified in a popular myth of one of the most popular Hindu gods, Ganesha, the remover of obstacles and the god of all beginnings. The dramatis personae of this version of the myth from South India and Sri Lanka are the great goddess, the Mahadevi, in her form of Shiva's wife, Uma, Ganesha and his younger brother Skanda, the god of your heroic exploits. As it goes, a mango was floating down the stream, and Uma, the mother, said that whoever rides around the universe first will get the mango. In other version, the promises of Modka, the balls of jaggery and rice, or wives. Skanda impulsively got on his golden peacock and went around the universe. But Ganesha, who wrote The Rat, had more wisdom. He thought, what could my mother have meant by this? He then circumambulated his mother, worshipped her, and said, I have gone around my universe. Since Ganesha was right, his mother gave him the mango. Skanda was furious when he arrived and demanded the mango, but before he could get it, Ganesha bit the mango and broke one of his tusks. Here, Skanda and Ganesha are personifications of the two opposing wishes of the older child. It is torn between a powerful push for independence and autonomous functioning and an equally strong pull towards surrender and re-immersion in the enveloping maternal fusion from which it has just emerged. Giving in to the pull of individuation and independence, Skanda becomes liable to one kind of punishment, exile from the mother's bountiful presence, and one kind of reward, the promise of functioning as an adult virile man. Going back to the mother, and I would view Ganesha's eating the mango as a return to and feeding at the breast, especially since we know that in Tamil Nadu, the analogy between a mango and the breast is a matter of common awareness, has the broken tusk, the loss of potential masculinity as a consequence. Remaining an infant, Ganesha's reward, on the other hand, will be never to know the pangs of separation from the mother, never to feel the despair at her absence. That Ganesha's lot is considered superior to Skanda's and is an indication of Hindu-Indian cultural preference in the dilemma of separation, individuation. While the Indian vision does not doubt the reality of separation, it refuses to admit that separation, individuation is the highest level of reality. Instead, the Indian vision of reality emphasizes union and oneness. Consider here the Punjabi proverb, which one often hears, or anthropologists often hear, the Punjabi proverb about death. It is like being shifted from one breast of the mother to the other. The child feels lost for that instant, but not for long. What stands out in this proverb is that it is a continuation of breastfeeding rather than the aspirations of weaning and the independence implicit in weaning that dominates the Indian imagination. Thus, one might say here too, as I did earlier about gender, about the existence of a range of psychic positions between a minimum of separation and individuation needed to function as an adult in a particular society and a maximum which cuts off all ties with family and community. There's a range of positions, all of which should be recognized by psychoanalysis as part of being human, rather than closely identifying with any particular position on the continuum as the only one that is healthy and mature. Our society's kind invitation on its birth anniversary also encourages me to look into the future of psychoanalysis in India. As a method of treatment, classical psychoanalysis with multiple sessions a week and extending over many years perhaps has a limited future all over the world. Although psychotherapies informed by psychoanalysis will continue to attract a clientele that not only seeks symptom relief, but especially and also their meaning. The so-called pure classical psychoanalysis may have to be reimagined as a transforming quest for self-understanding and growth of a wisdom that enriches our life with meaning and motivates us to act beyond our narrow interest. It will be seen as a modern meditative practice that is not religious, a two-person analyst and analysand, a two-person rational meditation, taking its special place among other introspective methods that stem from meditative and contemplative traditions of the world. As a method of treatment, I think there's a hopeful future for psychoanalytic informed therapy in India, only if it becomes more culturally and historically sensitive. That is, it recognizes that psychoanalytic universals can only be expressed in cultural particulars, that individual and cultural unconscious are inextricably intertwined. In the clinic, the meaning of an event in a person's life will not only be explored in relation to a stage of life and a developmental history, but also what the event means in the narrative of a cultural group. Actually, my position here goes back to Freud, who, in his The Question of Lay Analysis, argued that the education for the psychoanalyst should include, and I quote him, the history of civilization, mythology, the psychology of religion, and literature. Freud then emphasized, unless he is well oriented in these fields, the analyst will be unable to bring understanding to bear upon much of his material. Needless to add that what the Indian analyst needs to be familiar with is Indian history, mythology, religions, and literatures. Such a familiarity with the cultures of other civilizations is, of course, always a bonus. As a theory of mind, psychoanalysis will survive as a creative enterprise only if it is more in contact with and in intellectual exchange with other related disciplines in the humanities, such as sociology, anthropology, literature, religious studies, and so on, as also the neurosciences. In conclusion, I believe that in future, some of the more important contributions to psychoanalysis that can rejuvenate its theoretical conceptual state will come from Asia. The geography of psychoanalysis will become as important as its history and the great names associated with this history. Here, as Malika said, I cannot deny the wish for the evolution of an Indian psychoanalysis to replace the psychoanalysis in India we have today. A wish that the coming generation of Indian psychoanalysts do not continue to live on the outskirts of Western psychoanalysis, as in Rabindranath, the great Rabindranath Tagore's phrase, as the hewers of texts and drawers of book learning, but are equal contributors in shaping of a global psychoanalytic enterprise. My wish is that this engagement comes not by rejecting the psychoanalytic knowledge gathered over more than a century of the discipline's existence, but by critically engaging with the inevitable Western cultural biases in many of its models and theories. The wish is that a future generation of Indian analysts realizes that a critical stance is now needed after a long, much too long phase of idealization of Western analytic gurus, and that we need to engage with their valuable contributions from the perspective of Indian clinical experience and from an awareness of Indian cultural traditions and psychological thought, Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi. Looking back at the beginnings of Indian Psychoanalytic Society, it seems evident to me that this was also the aspiration that fueled Girindrasekhar Bose's writings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kakkar. It was really so absorbing that for a second I forgot that I need to continue with the ceremony. Thank you so very much. And I cheer your wish for Indian psychoanalysis so that we evolve, taking in all the knowledge that we can gather, and then we evolve naturally. Thank you. Thank you so much. So may I now call upon Paula Ellman, Dr. Paula Ellman. She would like to say a few words. Paula?
Thank you. I'm honored to be here to celebrate the Indian Psychoanalytic Society Centenary and having the pleasure to meet you all. As overall chair of the IPA Committee of Women in Psychoanalysis for the past almost 4 years, I've been involved with collaborating with colleagues internationally and our engagement around issues related to women and gender. We've held conferences in all regions of the IPA, inclusive of the Asia Pacific region and specifically in India. Thanks to our colleague and member of Co-op, Dr. Juma Basak, with her seemingly limitless energy, Co-op is flourishing in India. We've held 2 conferences in Calcutta, one in November 2019 and the other in March 2018, with a focus on current women and gender issues, where many of you have presented your papers in terms of our esteemed Dr. Kakkar. The earlier conference was entitled Women's Safety in Dogmatic Times, where consideration was made to women's well-being and security in India, which is often dependent on their gender positioning. The conference papers will be in print in a book published shortly by Routledge entitled Psychoanalytic and Sociocultural Perspectives on Women in India. And I've joined with Juma Basak and Gertrude Schlesinger-Kipp, who's with us today, to co-edit this valuable book. The second conference, Women in Romance, Sex, and Marriage, addressed the ways global changes impact the private space of women's lives. In this coming April, Co-op is co-sponsoring with the IPA the conference, The Intersection of Gender, Sexuality, and Our Current Crises, the Psychological Impact of Race, Politics, Economics, and COVID, which is posted on the IPA website, where Dr. Basak will be joining us as a presenter. And also we're hoping to collaborate with the India Psychoanalytic Society to offer a pre-Congress conference day, the day prior to the next IPA Asia Pacific Conference in the spring 2022. I hope to be able to see you all and to meet you at these upcoming meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much. May I call upon Ms. Teresa Pai, the chairperson of Asia Pacific Planning Committee. Teresa, are you here?
Thank you.
Yeah, Teresa.
Okay. It's an honor to be invited to join you today for this very important event. And I want to thank Dr. Kakkar for this lecture. It feels like I'm being more prepared for the 2022 conference already. I still remember the surprise I felt when I learned that India has such a long history in psychoanalysis. Or perhaps I should say psychoanalysis has a long history in India. As I'm saying this, it occurred to me that maybe my indecision about what's the frame and what's the process is because it's impossible to distinguish the two in this case. The mutual influence between culture and psychoanalysis is undeniable. 100 years is a very long time for a discipline to evolve and maintain its vitality in any place. For me, the result of this evolution is easily recognizable. In my contact with my Indian colleagues, I've always been struck by their humanitarian approach toward the community and the world at large, and their awareness and insight into prejudice and its effect on psychical life. The practice of psychoanalysis seemed to me have grown uniquely and admirably in India. It's something I wish for my own society in Taiwan and for Asia Pacific region. Okay, you must forgive me. I always get very nervous when I speak. It is precisely because of the intertwining of culture and the development of psychoanalysis that we are moving toward forming a region.
Teresa, would you unmute yourself? Yeah, thank you.
It's an unconscious act. Sorry, have I muted myself for a while?
Just a few seconds.
Okay. It is precisely because of the intertwining of culture and the development of psychoanalysis that we are moving toward forming a region that's uniquely ours and yet connected to the psychoanalytic community at large. As I understand, being different and yet staying together is a very relevant issue for the Indian society, and now really a paramount issue for the world. This is why it's so appropriate that as we continue to experience all the chaos and violence along with the pandemic, we shall have a place to process and understand differences in our next Asia Pacific conference in India. I think we all have much to learn from you. Although I don't yet know what shape psychoanalysis will take in Asia Pacific, or what our fourth region will look like in the future, but I have no doubt Indian Psychoanalytical Society will have a significant impact in the process. Thank you, and I hope to meet you all in person in 2022.
Thank you, Teresa. We do hope to meet you all, especially you, with what you said. Let's meet together. So now, Gauri Salvi, our presenter from Bombay Society, is going to be with us and present her short views on staying with hope and the life instinct.
Thank you, Bharati. Dr. Virginia Ungar, Dr. Sudhir Kakkar, Dr. Pushpa Mishra, and colleagues both senior and junior from India as well as across the world. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here today, even if it is virtually, and to be a part of this very special occasion to flag off the centenary celebrations of our Indian Psychoanalytic Society. For an event such as this, hosted by the IPS in Kolkata, it seems only appropriate that I begin with some words borrowed from Rabindranath Tagore. I've taken this from his book, Stray Birds, where he says, "If you shed tears when you miss the sun, you also miss the stars." And I quote these words today because they embody an aspiration for hope, for life instinct, as it were, so essential in the work that we all do. At no time has the need for us to stay with hope, life instinct, been more urgent than this last year, which we have all struggled through, and in fact, still continue to do so. For us here in India, it has been a year that unfolded in a series of exceedingly distressing events. We went through extremely troubled times, culminating, I think, with immense suffering caused by the pandemic, taking its toll on our physical, mental, and emotional well-beings. Our minds have been constantly bombarded with terrifying statistics about the virus. Surely, all of this must also take some place in our inner world. When we step out of this lockdown, what kind of a world will we emerge into? A dangerous and uncertain one, living with a new position in which we cannot know? All across the world, psychoanalysts have faced unprecedented clinical challenges, with a sudden and prolonged transition to working online during this pandemic, the constant questioning of, can you see me? Can you hear me? Has taken on a whole new meaning and dimension, as both analyst and analysand have struggled to place each other into the frame or out of it. No longer do we have the certainty that the patient is there because we see them on the couch. We've had to grapple with unstable internet connections, with the ways in which the patients arrange their camera, their microphone, their headphones, etc., how they present themselves in ways that keep it out of the management of the analyst. Both the analysands fear that the analyst may actually die or that they may infect the analyst, as well as the analyst's fear of contaminating the patient and providing a safe environment, have taken on a reality factor. The analysts have also to take care of their own state of health, to be able to go on being for their patient as well as themselves as analysts. The norms of in-room analysis has been set aside, and at present, online has become the new normal. With lockdowns and quarantines, conferences, and seminars, which we have always looked forward to as venues that provide nourishment and rejuvenation for the mind, have come to a halt, isolating us even further from each other. Of course, the IPA and the IPS have worked consistently to keep the webinars, podcasts, and lectures going online, so that many of us have felt at least remotely connected. However, as with analysts across the world, psychoanalysts and candidates of the IPS have also learned to extricate their minds out of the quagmire of quarantines, isolations, and lockdowns, and have creatively molded and shaped their work to flow with the needs of the time. Here, perhaps, it's helpful to call Freud to mind. In two encyclopedia articles he wrote, psychoanalysis is not a system having no room for fresh discoveries. It keeps close to the facts in its field of study, seeks to solve the immediate problems of observation, and gropes its way forward by the help of experience. In a recent conversation with a colleague from Australia, he pointed me towards the writings of Ella Sharp, an analyst in London from way back in 1921 to 1947. Sharp had underlined the importance of having clarity in our minds about who we are and what we do. She believed that clinical practice was shaped by the internal contents of one's mind and by the presence in that mind of the capacity for movement and elasticity. She wrote, psychoanalysis ceases to be a living science when technique ceases to be an art. Through the period of this pandemic, all of us, as analysts across the globe, have been forced to bring together science, technology, art in unprecedented ways, to find that creative way to continue to reach and connect to our patients, even through flat screens and headphones. And often, despite the shortcomings of the new normal, the rewards too have been heartwarming. Yolanda Gampel comes to mind, Israeli psychoanalyst, and she puts it rather well. She says, in these times of corona, we exit our comfort zone and we meet with our patient through the screen, a face-to-face that makes us discover what we did not see in the other. And I myself am the other, the one that my patient will discover in me. For example, all my wrinkles. And I see the other while I see myself. The other emerges in this otherness, but I do too. How much we learn. It's against this backdrop that I would like to briefly mention some of our work in schools and communities in different parts of India. One of our most important outreach programs has been that of work in schools, providing psychoanalytic psychotherapy to students and supportive work with parents and teachers. While it has proved immensely challenging to continue remotely, as often the families do not even have computers, and sometimes one mobile phone is shared by all family members, our therapists have persisted against all odds and have managed to keep alive links with their young patients until schools reopen and work can once again move to the therapy room. In addition, responding to the heightened levels of anxiety during these pandemic months, particularly during the lockdown period, we have offered free phone sessions to those in emotional distress. Some might say that this is not analytical work, but I must highlight here that the response was enormous, and therapists have conducted innumerable such sessions with the calls for help still continuing. In both these examples, as indeed in all the analytic work we do, the endeavor has always been for the analyst and patient to connect and communicate towards a deeper understanding of their inner world. We have, no doubt, lost out many significant dimensions of the intensive work we have been familiar with in our setting of the therapy room. The platforms of Zoom, Skype, etc., were never, I think, meant to replace human-to-human contact. And surely we will get back to the more intimate and irreplaceable experience of in-person analysis. But till then, we continue to find ways to reach our patients, to stay with hope and the life instinct during these dark and distressing times. In conclusion, I will turn once more to Tagore's words. "Clouds come floating into my life," he said, "no longer to carry rain or usher storm, but to add color to my sunset sky." And on that hopeful note, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you so very much. May I invite Timothy, Dr. Timothy Keogh from Australia. Are you there? Yeah.
Thank you, Bharati. Yes, President Virginia Ungar, Vice President Sergio Nick, President-elect Harriet Wolfe, and Vice President-elect Adriana Pingler, and of course, Dr. Sudha Kaka, and distinguished colleagues. I'm very honored to be able to have been asked to say a few words on behalf of the Australian Psychoanalytical Society at the inauguration of your centenary celebrations for the Indian Psychoanalytical Society. I've been working with my Indian colleagues in one form or another for over a decade now, most recently in my role as Australian Society President as part of the IPA Asia Planning Committee. Our society also has a long-standing involvement with the IPA-sponsored biannual India-Israel-Australia conference. In more recent years, our Australian members have participated with our Indian colleagues in the Asia-Pacific conferences, initially in Taiwan and then Tokyo. And I've also always been impressed by the lively and original contribution of my Indian colleagues. I think in link theory terms that I imagine that Indian members may have been influenced through vertical links represented by the original thinking of their founding father, Dr. Girindrasekhar Bose, and via horizontal links by the rich tapestry of Indian culture. Their very lively correspondence that's been referred to by other speakers over 17 years with Dr. Bose and Dr. Freud, I think showed how prescient some of Bose's thoughts were, especially in relation to the development of a two-person psychology and intersubjectivity, amongst other things. Such original thought, which became ultimately freer from psychoanalytic colonial influences, I think characterized the later development of psychoanalysis in India, which has flourished in an extremely diverse population, which comprises just so many different religious and cultural groups. Original articles in the Society's journal, which, as mentioned previously, established in 1947, continue to demonstrate now the renewed and blossoming interest in psychoanalysis that was referred to in the video. In congratulating the Indian Society and acknowledging the impressive leadership of its current president, Dr. Misra, I hope we can draw the attention of IPA members worldwide to the impressive history of this society, and in particular to the part that it's played in the development of psychoanalysis. I note in concluding that the IPA Asia Conference in Kolkata in 2022 that Dr. Ungar referred to is part of the centenary celebrations. This conference, whose program chair is our current Vice President, Dr. Louise Geiler, will provide a further opportunity for our APAS members to work together with our Indian colleagues, and I hope further celebrate the centenary of the Indian Society. But for now, on behalf of the Australian Society, I wish our close and valued colleagues a very happy and successful start to your centenary celebrations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Timothy. May I call in Gertrude? Please, would you like to share your experience with our society?
Yes, thank you very much, dear Pushpa Misra, dear Sudhir Kaka, dear colleagues, and especially the COVAP colleagues who know me a little. To be invited to this 100 years anniversary inauguration of the Indian Psychoanalytic Society makes me feel much honored. Congratulations. 2 times, as Paula Ehrman already said, in 2018 and 19, I had the luck to be able to come to the COVAP conferences in Kolkata. Now in the pandemic afterwards, it seems like a big gift for me that this was possible. Between these 2 journeys, I read the book by Uffe Jensen, it's a German historian, How the Couch Came to Kolkata. And in this book, I learned so much extremely interesting things about the first International Psychoanalytic Society, which was founded in Kolkata. The more I felt excited when I was invited by Pushpa Misra in 2019 to your society's house to give their supervision to the excellent candidates of your society, and also participating in the opening ceremony of your library, which we saw in the film. I hope it was rescued during the cyclone. Several times before, I have been in my beloved India, but the first time was in the COVAP conference in Mumbai. I think it was in 2002. But these 2 visits to Kolkata let me dive into the spirit of India. I had much time to walk. Due to the heat, more to stroll. Hours through the streets of Kolkata, often alone, but also with Mahua Chatterjee, who showed me around. In these streets, which Juma Basak describes so beautifully during the pandemic and the cyclone, I cite Juma. I quote Juma. The streets of this city are not mere roads for commuting, but have been the hub of community life itself, social exchange and connect across caste and class, homes for innumerable, including the site of women's struggle to her right for public domain. In other words, the historical chaos of the streets in the city have been its strange sense of order for its people. End of quote. I found my inner order in these streets, in the temples, in the museums, in the people. Nobody can believe this here in Germany because you say, you go to Kolkata and either you never go there again or you love it. And I learned to know in the COVAP conferences how well interconnected the psychoanalysts in India are with their society, as Guri Sari just told us, with university, with schools, with clinics like Crystal Mind, and with humanitarian organizations, like so well described, for example, by Gunjan Chankat Kemkar about her work with Sabari, a home for women with psychosocial disabilities. As member of the committee of the IPA and humanitarian organizations and the chair of Migration and Refugee Subcommittee, I know the value of this work, like this, especially for young people in difficult life in Kolkata, and training, also establishing their professional and private life. In the last Zoom conference with COVAP Kolkata in fall, especially with these young candidates, it was in October, I think, I intended to give them help and comfort because we here in Germany, we also suffer from the pandemic. We also are locked down and we feel alone and we are bereft of our social contacts. But I thought on a more comfortable level, of course. But in the end of this Zoom conference, I understood why I wanted this Zoom conference. These were the young women from Kolkata who gave the comfort to me, the elderly, and who showed in their spirit that one can see life and death and illness and loss and hope, like Guri Salvi said, also in a different light. So thank you so much. I hope to see you again, not only on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude. So do we. We hope to see you again too. May I invite now Nilofer Kaul from our Delhi Society. She would be presenting some aspects of unanalyzed transference in analysis. Nilofer.
Hello, everybody. Dr. Kakkar, Dr. Ungar, Dr. Mishra, Bharti, and all my distinguished colleagues. It's a tough act to follow, all of you. I'm very grateful to have this chance of sharing the platform on this historic day with my respected seniors and my colleagues. The significance of this day is not lost on anyone here. Thanks to the foresight of our predecessors, we have the presence of psychoanalysis in India and actually exist on the map of the psychoanalytic world. For sustaining this, one has to acknowledge the contributions of people who have trained and continue to train analysts, teach analysis, run analytic institutes, and those whose writings give a voice to India. After all these very rich inputs on cultural significance, I'm afraid I'm going to be dull and dreary. I'm going to talk about those aspects of transference that I feel I tend to neglect, and I'm hoping it'll find a resonance in your minds. We are aware that as things stand at the moment, psychoanalysis in India is booming. It is, of course, a part of a new demand for psychotherapy in general, but some of it, one hopes, is because psychoanalysis taps into a deeper need some patients come with. Working analytically is never ensured despite our training. I thought I would reflect on some areas that I find I tend to neglect. Transference, we have always been told, is quite distinctly one of our distinguishing features. And yet we often find it a rather elusive phenomenon that keeps slipping away and changing in the analytic space, somewhat like a shapeshifter. This brings up questions in my mind about what areas go unexamined in our daily practice. I'm sure for most of you, what I raise are old questions and may sound quite naive, But as these are still difficult questions for me, I thought of saying them aloud. I will try and keep a bit of focus on areas that I hope I will be helped in. Of course, this is not about seeking answers, because, as Wilfred Bion was very fond of saying, the answer itself is the death of the question. Nevertheless, perhaps we can raise still more questions. We find many people who are keen to get help, and we each of us turn many of these potential patients away. At such moments, I often catch myself either acting without thinking, or paralyzed in my thinking, or responding concretely. Now I will mention my first set of questions and the starting point. When we have a free slot and find ourselves in a place where we need to choose a patient, then what are the ways in which we pick and choose our patients? Do we take the first one who calls? If not, why this one and not that one? And what do we tell ourselves when we agree to see X but not Y? Do we assess their economic potential? Is this more important when you have a sliding scale? A patient of mine who is a consultant told me he was having a Zoom meeting with a new client, and all the while he was listening to his client, he was also looking at the living room behind him and assessing how much to charge this client. I recall the intensely uncomfortable feelings this evoked in the transference for me. Was I the same as him? Did I need him to be rich when I took him on? There may also be other not so noble reasons we have to take on new cases. Maybe to have an influential patient who is famous and who may lead us to fame. And even more ordinarily, to take a patient who we find interesting. This is in fact quite common and may disguise other deeper transferential feelings. What do we find interesting? In fact, I would like to go out on a limb and suggest we always do have some criteria, and that these often go unnoticed. Some patients make us feel indispensable or even just significant. Sometimes they excite our voyeurism. Culturally and emotionally, they arouse affinity. Or inversely, they excite our curiosity about difference. Here, race, culture, ethnicity, sexual diversity are all big players and go unanalyzed as they evoke shame in the analyst. Collegial discussions often lead to feelings of inferiority in therapists when the patient is richer, better read, more traveled, from a more privileged race. All too often, we are being seduced, intimidated, patronized, and such engulfing feelings blind us. Or do we choose because one person is more apparently needy than another? That is, do we secretly indulge our omnipotence? Or do we choose a patient who is from our own fraternity, someone who will help others in turn? Wilfred Bion said, an ambition to help the patient is inadequate. For if we do that, this will be quickly grasped by him and swept into his system of attack. If the psychoanalyst has formulated any other aim, Bion writes warningly, then he is no better off. The patient knows and he will demolish this or use it to attack him. If someone is taken as an obligation to someone or something, this too will become a source of great hostility. So all our well-meaning beliefs to spread the word, to help a friend's family member or help a patient's friend are stood on their head. In one such effort I made to oblige a colleague, the patient became convinced that I was in cahoots with his sister and thereby his parents to keep tabs on him. He may well have been right, not because I was breaching confidentiality, but insofar as his family's unconscious design was concerned. Perhaps the family had wanted an ally to bring him back into the fold. This treatment did not last. My blindness to his fantasies certainly did not help our relationship. Naively, I imagined I was agreeing to a colleague's request, and this would have no consequence. Another instance I am thinking of was a patient who passed on the number of her therapist to her friend, an everyday occurrence. This patient was a very quiet, docile woman who spoke so softly that the therapist could not hear her. The patient she referred turned out to be violent, homicidal/suicidal. The latter treatment did not last. In a subsequent session, the therapist felt decimated by her old docile patient in a way she could not understand. She could not understand because the verbal exchange had been very civil. But when we discussed this later, it emerged that the patient had referred a violently rejected part of herself, and this was really her way of bringing that into the transference. However, when this violence could not be tolerated, in the analysis, the original patient had no choice but to bring it to my colleague. This was a strange, uncanny experience for both of us to observe, and it made me retrospectively aware of many such referrals that I had failed to observe analytically. Is it possible that when we choose, we decide based on people's symptoms? Are we put off by their symptoms? Too aggressive, too boring, too psychotic? I remember being caught by John Steiner's mention, that considering that we are psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, we actually hate psychosis and are always wanting to get rid of it. We unthinkingly encourage our patients to go to psychiatrists so they can take pills that suppress their symptoms and make it easier for us to deal with them. How many times may this have influenced our work with our patients? Which patients do we refer out? At the beginning of my career, I was quite eager to start. I recall wondering if certain colleagues were dumping the undesirable patients on me. Equally, it must be said that there were the generous colleagues to whom I had, thanks to whom I had patients who I felt were good patients. What or who then qualifies as a good patient? These very questions of our culture become a lot more intense when we have students who come to us with stated and unstated hopes of becoming analysts. When we take on somebody who is also interested in training, it is altogether tricky territory. The chances of a pseudo-analysis are greater, as perhaps all my colleagues know. In the case of such patients, what Meltzer calls the preform transference is a lot stronger. He describes the preform transference as that which has gathered its expectations from literature, films, friends' accounts, and we may add culture here. It is generally either austerely institutional or wildly romantic, and it is set aside promptly when the setting has been clarified. This should give way in due course to the gathering of a transference that is not coming from inherited ideas, but is rooted in the specificity of the transference that takes shape in the analytic field. Both analyst and patient unconsciously may deviate from analysis into pedagogy. I recall a colleague who took on a patient who happened to be a student and was taken aback when after 2 years, the patient asked about the next step. The next step to what, my colleague asked. In the patient's mind, the analyst knew that she wanted to train, but this had never been spoken of. This is an instance of omniscience on the part of the patient, of course, but it makes me think that this is one of those unstated aspects of the transference which we may, I certainly feel this is true for me, fail to address, as it may never present itself till it actually does. Analysts may find the pressure of such unstated and even stated hopes quite intolerable or even offensive. They may also develop a mentor-like relationship with their trainees. In the latter case, there may be areas of omnipotence, as when analysts have any relations outside the analytic arena. These could be seemingly innocent areas like sending readings, suggesting possibilities for doing better analysis, etc. Many of these interventions in the external life of our patients may come from unanalyzed areas of our mind. And we also know that we can never be fully analyzed. I feel it would help me to think with my peers about some of these. Are we always able to separate our omnipotence and narcissistic investment in our patients so we can continue doing psychoanalysis? Or do we slide unnoticed into becoming omnipotent mentors? And much of this may also go unobserved. And it is, of course, not so much about dispensing with this as it is to do with bringing them into the realm of the transference. It is not so much about finding a pure motive for taking on a patient as it is about bringing this into the field of transference and countertransference. A second set of questions is around the thorny issue of termination. We have learned that the unconscious is not governed by time, and having an artificially prefixed term period is not a workable model. We also find that becoming more functional is an overvaluation of the external world and rather super-egoish as a model. But when work with a patient becomes too strenuous or too tedious, do we unconsciously try to terminate it? Let me give an example. A patient I will call Amita, with whom I suddenly began to feel a hostility and boredom. This was very strange, as for many years I had felt very protective towards her. How I remember her as someone who communicated an internal world with a relentlessly cruel set of objects. She had first come when she had been grieving the death of her young child, and that was what brought her to a crisis. One detail that sticks in my mind from the early years is that every time her mother got angry, she would say to her in vigorous Punjabi, "Why were you ever born?" After she lost her young boy, Amita's mother said, "Now just think of his life as a dream and stop mourning. Get on with your life." The sessions would be mostly a litany of indescribably cruel and yet repetitious events in her week. It struck me that this mother, not unusually, felt giving birth to a daughter was a defeat, and she seemed to be overcome with rivalry rather than maternal tenderness. To go back to the question at the beginning, why did I turn hostile? I was alarmed. I'm feeling in the room with her. I start having fantasies of terminating work with her. I think of getting more interesting patients. In my irritation, I find myself thinking of her as unable to think, to take in analytic interpretations, and it takes me very long to realize that the toxic wish to expel her has entered our relationship, and I am in danger of becoming the mother who wants to expel an unworthy daughter who feels that her milk should nourish worthier children. Somehow, before it was too late, this struck me, for better or for worse. But I cannot say with any certainty how many times I may have acted unconsciously to make this happen. And the issue of termination raises the final set of preoccupations I wanted to touch on today. How do we conceptualize psychoanalysis when we decide on the question of termination? Would we be right thinking of psychoanalysis as a cure for mental illness? Is a medical model appropriate for psychoanalytic thinking? Or are we restricting psychoanalysis when we use improvement and cure as criteria? Bion suggests that often the individuality of a mind is at the cost of the group. The group or family wants the patient to be more endurable. This acts as a pressure on the analytic dyad to show improvement. Does this compromise psychoanalysis? Moreover, does the idea of a cure put a pressure on the analysis to hurry through? Is it a disguised fear of one's psychotic parts? I know how disturbing it can be when I am with an old patient and we are having a satisfactory conversation which is suddenly interrupted by a hallucinatory moment. One attempts through interpretation to smooth it over. But such an interpretation may be born from a fear of my own psychotic part. How does one respond so as neither to encourage the psychosis nor stymie it? Or should we be thinking of the growth of the mind? In that case, can we imagine helping our patients grow without growing ourselves? The patient goes to the analyst because he is not able to think of his life in a way that makes it bearable. If the mind has to grow, can it be without the simultaneous growth of the analyst? How can we hope for change unless we are ready to change ourselves? I would like to end with a line or two from Bion on the idea of progress in psychoanalysis, which I thought was quite apposite for us. He said, progress in psychoanalysis is inseparable from a need to tolerate the painful concomitants of mental growth, of which the immediate revelation of further problems requiring solution is not the least. For the psychoanalyst, the problem presents itself for solution not only by the analysand, but by the psychoanalyst as part of their own growth. He may develop contemporaneously with his patient, or independently, or not at all. Bion, in a somewhat oracular voice he often employs, warns that if we stop growing, we may be a part of the sociology of psychoanalysis, but we are no longer doing psychoanalysis. On this note, I end here, having aired some of my own doubts and uncertainties in the hope they will find some room in your minds and through that process bring me a little clarity. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Nilofer. Thanks for your short paper. Well, I know that we are almost not bordering, but we have crossed our, 2 hours time. The Calcutta members are going to present an imaginary dialogue between Plato and Freud. But before that, I see Professor Ehrlich, I see Sally, I see Louise Geiler, I see Maria, and quite a few other people. So I just would like to ask if you people just want to say something for just a few minutes, a minute maybe. So Professor Ehrlich, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very pleased, excited, and grateful for being here and ushering in this year of celebration together with you and all the distinguished colleagues. I just want to mention 2 or 3 of my contacts with your society, which have been, in a way, very meaningful to me. I think the first one was when I attended your initiative of forming the Indian-Australian meetings, which then, after my joining that, became the Indian-Australian-Israeli meetings. And those have been attended by many members of my society, of the Israel Society, and myself. And we've always found them to be excellent meetings from both a social point of view, a cultural point of view, and above all, from a psychoanalytic point of view. So that was one contact. Another one, which I cherish, is that on my visit, when I visited your society, together with Mira, my wife, I was honored when you asked me to give the Dr. Bose Memorial Lecture in your headquarters in Kolkata. And I felt that was really an invitation to be, in a way, at your home. I've had other contacts with the society, the different branches, which I will not enumerate, and many of your members. What I find mostly so interesting about you, and also what I think Dr. Kakar was speaking to, was this unique integration of East and West, of Western psychoanalysis with your particular brand of psychoanalytic and cultural views and rich cultural mythology, fantasy world, and everything else that enriches you. I think that's such a unique contribution. And I look forward to a greater integration, actually, between Western and Eastern psychoanalysis, which will also have to do with the creation of the Asia-Pacific region, of course. But I think the Indian society has a very important role to play in. And I wish you all the best and a very exciting and fruitful centenary year. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Professor Ehrlich. Well, Luis, would you like to say a few words? Luis, you have to unmute yourself. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Thank you, Bharti. I too feel it's been an honor for me to participate in this inaugural meeting. It's been an absolute pleasure and an insight into the development of psychoanalysis in India. And I look forward to working with you as we plan the Asia Pacific Conference for 2022. And I was thinking, as I was listening to everyone speaking, our conference theme, containing diversity, bridging difference, is so appropriate and so well captures the spirit of the development of psychoanalysis in India. And just to say, congratulations on this meeting, and I look forward with absolute pleasure to meeting you next year.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you so much. Well, Sally, would you like to say something? You'll have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. We can't hear you, Sally, because you're muted. No, you'll have to unmute yourself, or you can just type your message. We will read it out. In the meantime, among the guests, did I miss anybody? Would anybody like to say something? A few
Okay,
minutes.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sally, we can hear you.
I couldn't, you had to unmute me. That was the problem. Okay. I just wanted to say that I'm hugely pleased to be here and offer all my congratulations. It's so moving to listen to this long, this ancient, noble psychoanalytic tradition with all its vibrancy, and particularly important is its cultural complexity and richness, because I think that, looking forward, we need to have, as has been said already, so much more integration of ways of seeing and broadening that. They become so narrowed in what we call the Western way of seeing things. For those of you who don't know, I'm the chair of a new, in the community committee that Virginia set up on climate. And of course, this is going to be, whether we like it or not, such an important area. And we know from even the experience this year of what India has suffered, and I've been delighted to work with Pushpa Misra, Dr. Misra, who's a member of our climate committee, the IPA Climate Committee. I've got to know her and got very personally fond of her, and we hope very much to be able to work on using different cultural traditions to actually expand a psychoanalysis that can accommodate the environment. It's not threatening to our theory. In fact, it's overdue that we should be doing this, and our committee is working on that. And anyway, just that's about that input. But just to say congratulations, and I'm so thrilled and honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I hope I have not missed anybody out, but we have still time. I'm again begging my pardon because we have crossed our line and our time, but we would like to present this imaginary dialogue between Plato and Freud. Plato is being played by Dr. Pallavi Banerjee, and Freud would be played by Dr. Jhilam Poddar, and there would be Alcibiades by Devjani Datta. Please enjoy this.
Good evening, everybody. Dr. Mishra, Dr. Angar, Dr. Prengler, Dr. Elman, Dr. Schlesinger, Dr. Geiler, Dr. Dastur, and every other erudite scholar that is present over here. This is a script that has been written by Dr. Pushpa Mishra. And it's an imaginary dialogue between Plato and Freud on their discussions about eros. Firstly, before beginning, I would just like to thank everyone over here, along with Dr. Banerjee and Ms. Datta, that we are privileged to be able to present this script in front of everybody over here on this auspicious occasion. And I hope all of us can do the justice to this content and to the great scholars we are getting to portray today. Without much ado, I would like to, I'll ask Dr. Banerjee to begin.
Hello, young man. How are you doing?
Young man? I'm not young. I'm 164 years old.
You are 2000 years my junior, son. I'm Plato of Greece, born sometime in 428 BC.
Oh, great to meet you. My salute to you, sir. I'm Sigmund Freud. Used to do some psychology in the yonder world. Tried to help people suffering from psychological problems. Even started a new school called psychoanalysis.
I know. I have heard about you from some people coming from the earth from time to time. I heard that your work has many names from our mythology, like Eros, Thanatos, Oedipus, narcissism, etc.
Yes, Eros is the name I have given to the psychosexual energy that is behind our pleasure seeking activities and essentially binds us together. It is the uniting force in human beings.
What a strange coincidence. I too have written a dialogue on Eros, the god of love.
Yes, sir. If you have time, can we discuss a few things about it?
Okay, let us sit here under this tree. You know, I have specially dealt with this topic in my dialogue symposium. And I hope you know that in most of my dialogues, my teacher, Socrates, is my mouthpiece.
Yes, I know that. I'm fond of your dialogues, though I haven't read all of them.
You know, in symposium, the discussion on Eros begins in a party at the house of Agathon, and everyone is giving his view on Eros after dinner. In fact, it was Phaedrus who expressed a view similar to that of yours. He said that it is because of the God of love that people can live together, work unitedly, and form a city or even an army.
It is very heartening to hear that, sir. I am a physician. I consider Eros as one of the two basic instincts. Eros is the life instinct, and Thanatos, the death instinct. But I agree with the main point. The very nature of Eros is to create unities, to bind people together, to urge the ego to come out of its isolation and establish relations with other persons and objects of the external world. I have often expressed it by saying that the task of Eros is to establish ever greater unities and to preserve them.
Oh, is that so? Socrates, however, had a different view. You know what? Socrates learnt about the nature of love from Didyma, an old lady deeply well versed in many forms of knowledge.
Proceed, sir. I cannot wait to hear it.
First, she explained to Socrates that need is the mother of love and resource is its father. Being the son of need and resource, it is perpetually needy, but has the resourcefulness of its father and plays upon the good and the beautiful. It is not delicate and lovely as most of us believe, but harsh and arid, barefoot and homeless, always partaking his mother's poverty.
That is a wonderful metaphor, sir. It captures the psychological mechanism of love perfectly. All our love relationships and all our affectionate ties arise from need. So it is true that need is the mother of love. No conflict with my account of Eros. I, of course, believe that Eros, or libido as I call it, comes with a fixed quantity in every individual. If you, if you spend more energy on a specific kind of activity, it results in the depletion of energy in other spheres. Does your view say something about this aspect of love?
In my dialogue Republic, I think I have said that when a man's desires incline strongly in one direction, they are weakened for other things, as if the stream has been diverted to another channel. So when a man's desires have been taught to flow in the channel of learning and all that sort of thing, they will be concerned with the pleasures of the soul in itself and will be indifferent to those of which the body is the instrument.
Exactly that's what I want to assert. How can there be so similarity in the thoughts of two persons thousands of years apart?
Wait, my son, don't be so hasty. I have talked about the ascent of love, a ladder of love, whereby love moves from the lower rung of a ladder to the higher rungs and ends with the love for the knowledge of the ultimate form of beauty or good.
Continue, I pray.
I've already said that love itself is not beautiful. That is why it seeks beautiful things. And beauty is good. Men want to possess the good forever. The only way they can possess it forever is by being immortal. The only way they can be immortal is by reproduction. So, in the first stage, love is that of a beautiful body, of one body only. But soon one realizes how akin the beauty of one body is to the beauty of other bodies, and that the beauty of soul is greater than the beauty of body. So he cultivates a noble nature. He soon comes to appreciate the beauty of orderliness and harmony manifest in our laws and institutions. From this stage, he passes on to appreciate the beauty of various sciences, of knowledge and wisdom in an unquenchable love for wisdom. It is this that would lead him to the love of the single form of knowledge, the knowledge of the form of beauty, which is the ultimate beauty.
Wait a minute. Briefly speaking, the ladder of ascent progresses like this: from love for the beauty of individual body to the love for the beauty of everybody, then to the beauty of soul, and then to the beauty of institutions, and to the beauty of knowledge and sciences. From there, one starts loving the form of beauty or ultimate beauty. Is that correct?
You got it, my dear.
It seems to me that this is a progression from passion to reason. One begins with love for passion and ends by becoming a lover of reason, leaving passion or emotions behind. The beauty of knowledge, of sciences, and finally of the ultimate form of beauty all have to be apprehended by reason. So, somewhere in the process, you leave passion behind.
Well, reason is the guiding principle of life. It has to educate passion and emotion. Doesn't reason have any place in your system?
It certainly has. In my system, the id is the representative of passions. But the ego is guided by reason and logic and controls the emotions and passions of the id. And the goal that psychoanalysis sets for itself is: where the id was, the ego shall be.
So, why do I hear a critical note in your voice? Your system also talks about replacing passions or emotions by reason as its ultimate goal.
But it seems to me that in your system, love or eros in its process of progression becomes completely transformed into reason. So I was wondering, what ultimately remains of eros in your philosophical system?
Well, transformation sure occurs, and a person tries to achieve this transformation in his lifetime, like my master Socrates. And you know what? Towards the end of the party, Alcibiades enters the party and makes certain comments about Socrates in the presence of Socrates himself. Alcibiades and Socrates are studies in contrast. Socrates, an embodiment of love regenerate, and Alcibiades, an epitome of love unregenerate.
Enters Alcibiades.
Oh, here comes Alcibiades. Come here, my dear. Will you recount to this gentleman what you said about my master Socrates in the party hosted by Agathon? I see you are drunk just as you were on that day.
Never mind, Plato. I cannot take my mind off Socrates, and I drink to keep him away from my thoughts. I do not love wisdom, but I love the lover of wisdom, Socrates, and all my efforts to win his love have failed. Tried to seduce him in so many ways, so many times, went to meet him alone, expecting to hear some of the sweet nothings. Went to gymnasium with him, invited him for dinner, and purposefully made the whole thing so late that he won't be able to go back home. So he stayed back, and we slept on the same bed. Me pouring out my heart to him, and I lay there all night, naked, holding him in my arms. Yet, when I got up the next morning, I had not slept with Socrates within the meaning of the act than if he had been my father or my elder brother. Can you imagine my disappointment? And I'm known to be the handsomest man in Greece. And I had a pretty high opinion of my attractiveness. I'm done now, and I must be leaving.
Alcibiades is so distraught because he doesn't realize that Socrates has achieved the highest rung of eros. He has acquired the wisdom of the ultimate form of beauty and good, and all other forms of passions mean nothing to him.
It seems your eros is more related to the transformation of a person. It is more egocentric. I have high respect for Socrates and your philosophy, but my idea of eros is a little different. I have always considered eros as the pleasure-giving force in our personality. It unites us. It is through this eros or libido that our ego learns to extend its boundaries and becomes related with more and more objects of the external world. And the more we become connected with outer world, the less we remain confined within our small pleasures. In the language of our science, we express it by saying the greater the object libido, the less becomes the quantity of ego libido. So our systems have contrary ideas about eros, though there are many apparent similarities. Have you heard the name of Einstein, sir?
Yes, I have heard that he is a great scientist.
A very great scientist, sir, but a greater humanist. Pained by the destruction of war, he wrote a letter to me, asking my opinion as to how we can stop this kind of devastating wars. And the only solution that came to my mind was to bring the capacities of eros to fore. If I remember correctly, I wrote to him, if willingness to engage in war is an effect of the destructive instinct, the most obvious plan will be to bring eros, its antagonist, into play against it. Anything that encourages the growth of emotional ties between men must operate against war. These ties may be of two kinds. In the first place, they may be relations resembling those towards a loved object, though without having a sexual aim. The second kind of emotional tie is by means of identification. Whatever leads men to share important interests produces this community of feeling, these identifications. And the structure of human society is to a large extent based on them. So, sir, to me, eros is the uniting force and maybe the savior of this world. Sir, it was so rejuvenating talking to you. Martha must be waiting for me. It's quite late. So I beg leave of you, sir. Good day. Thank you, everyone. With that, we end our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jhilam. Thank you, Pallavi. And thank you, Dejani. That was lovely. Well, we are just going to present a video that Dr. Andrew Brook sent us because he couldn't present himself here. And then we are going to close with vote of thanks, which our Delhi chapter secretary is going to give, Dr. Miss Minima Dastur. Yeah. So just this video, and then we are going to close with vote of thanks. Thanks for your patience.
As you have just heard, I'm Andrew Brooke, former treasurer of the IPA, former president of the Canadian Psychoanalytic. Greetings to everyone at this auspicious occasion. Greetings from Canada and greetings from the IPA. 100 years is a long time in the history of psychoanalysis. 100 years ago, Freud had just published Beyond the Pleasure Principle. He was still developing the structural model. The Indian Society is actually older than the British Society by a couple of years, and it's only a couple of years younger than the American Association, APSA. So India was there from the very beginning. The person who founded the Indian Society, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name at least slightly, Girindrasekhar Bose, not only was the founding president, but he was the president for the next 30 years. I've had a connection to psychoanalysis in India for a long time, since my training. In fact, one of my very first psychoanalytic publications came out in Samizka, a comparison of some things in Freud to some things that the German philosopher Immanuel Kant has said, another great interest of mine. During my time as treasurer, I took a special interest in the development of psychoanalysis in India, and indeed throughout Asia, and tried to help in some, I'm afraid, fairly modest ways. For example, to make it easier for Indian members and candidates to get to congresses, especially in one notable case, a prize winner. I was also very glad to see that Co-op sponsored a conference in India, and so it goes. India has had and will continue, I'm sure, to have a major role to play in the emerging fourth region of the IPA, the Asia Pacific region. Well, these are difficult times in India and around the world, though I'm very glad to see that India is well ahead of most of the rest of the world in the program to vaccinate against COVID. And while we struggle through these times, I wish all my colleagues and friends in India all the best in this very auspicious celebration. I wish I could be there with you and for the years to come. Thank you.
Well, may I invite Minnie from our Bombay Society to give vote of thanks. Minnie, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now, Bharti?
Yes, yes.
So many thanks have been said by everyone, and it's been a wonderful presentation. So on behalf of our President, Dr. Mishra, and our Secretary, Bharti Jain, I thank our IPA President, Dr. Virginia Ungar, for inaugurating this very special day for a very significant landmark year for our Indian Psychoanalytical Society. It has been quite a journey for us from the time Dr. Bose corresponded with Sigmund Freud and forged a psychoanalytic link between India and Europe. The IPS has found continuous links with Indian philosophies, myths, ancient texts, and psychoanalysis. In fact, Winnicott used a verse from Tagore's poetry, "On the seashore of endless worlds, children play." This was the prelude for his 1967 paper on the location of cultural experience. Truly, psychoanalysis is the potential space in which peoples in different parts of the world and with different cultures can find a place to play, to create, and to understand each other. Hence, it is very pertinent that the theme of the Asia Pacific Conference this year in 2022 is going to be held in India, and it's around containing diversity, bridging differences. We hope that under the IPA and its new team, IPA will continue to support the IPS. India is a vast country with great diversities and differences, which are often bridged and sadly at times seem hopelessly out of reach. In our own reach work in universities, schools, social spheres, we continue to work for a greater understanding individually and collectively. It's been wonderful to see so many faces, at least on the net, again, which has been possible with technology. Great to see Timothy, Maria Teresa, and I will be totally amiss if I do not thank our past Vice President Alexandra Billinghurst, who visited us and strengthened our bonds with the IPA. I thank Virginia and Sergio for sending the team of Dr. Adriana Ponzoni and Dr. Anthony Stufkins, who also visited us in all three of our Psychoanalytic Society centers and gave us a lot of helpful feedback for our continued growth. We look forward to closer links with our different IPA societies and to open up further frontier and mutual dialogues. Look forward to seeing everybody at least in 2022. Goodbye.
Thanks, Minnie. We are closing with this, with the song of Ravindranath Tagore, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. And thank you. And we do hope to see you all again, probably in 2022.
We are called to lift up this nation and all its people to that place where the heart is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of truth and tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sands of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, dear Father. Let our country awake.
Thank you. With this, we close our ceremony and hope to meet you again very soon. Thank you all. Bye.